Right, hello and welcome to another Dauntless Development video. Today we're going to be looking at C# versus C++, kind of the differences between them. We're not going to go too in depth, I'm not going to get into too much of the technical side, but mostly just kind of what's the differences, which one should you choose as a beginner, which one should you choose as a professional, and yeah, what's the differences. I've already covered Unity versus Unreal Engine, and if you don't know, Unity uses C# and Unreal uses C++. So this will cover some of the some similar points, but there's other ones because this isn't just about game engines. So yeah, so on with this. So just to start off, I'm just going to talk about kind of my background and why I have an opinion on this. I've programmed seriously for like 4.5 years, a bit over that now. I had programmed before. I hadn't not done any programming in the past. I did some Visual Basic and Free Basic, and did some programming in electronics class at school and stuff like that. But never anything really serious until I started university, which was about 4.5 years ago ish. So I've been an indie game dev for about half a year, and I teach both C# and C++ online to various students. I've got a master's degree in computer games programming, so my focus is games. I initially learned C++. At university, they started us off with C++, and then I moved on to C# later, which I learned primarily through using it in Unity. I've used C++ in Unity, in Unreal, and C# in Unity, mostly. I've also used C# for networking, and I've used C++ with SFML to make a game engine, and something cut off there. But I've also used it in OpenGL. I don't know why that's cut off, but yeah, that should say OpenGL. So yeah, I've used C++ in quite a few applications, and I've used C# in quite a few as well. But primarily, my main usage of C# was Unity, and honestly, my main usage of C++ was not in Unreal. I probably did a lot more projects outside of Unreal. So C++ is probably my more knowledgeable just as a programming language, but C# is obviously the one I've used most through games because I use it all the time in Unity. So for an initial comparison, by the way, one thing I should note is for the format of this, everything on the left is C#, everything on the right is C++, hence the color coordination with the first slide. So C# is the left, C++ is the right. So, in C#, everything is assumed to be a reference to an existing object. So, for example, if you, say, created a variable called, if you, say, create a class, so you've got a class. Obviously you've got to understand these terms first. But if you've say created a class, or in simpler terms, you have created a copy of a thing, a version of a thing, you will have to either say that this is a new one. So you'll have to declare specifically. You'll have to explicitly state that it's new, or you'll have to give it pass it a reference to another thing that exists. Whereas the opposite is the case in C++, where everything is assumed to be a new object. So whenever you create a variable, whenever you create a class whenever you create an instance of a class, it's always assumed to be brand new, which means that every time you create it, you are allotting new memory. Talking about memory, in C#, the compiler handles all memory management. So you shouldn't, although it is theoretically possible, but you shouldn't run into any memory leaks or any problems to do with using too much memory and stuff like that in C#, because the compiler handles all that. You don't need to worry about it. However, C++, you need to manage the memory manually, which means whenever you create something, you must also destroy it before you close the program. If you don't destroy it, then you can run into a lot of issues with memory leaks, which can cause not only the program to crash, but potentially the computer. or at least other programs that are running as well. It'll generally cause slowdown of the computer. I would assume that most people have encountered a memory leak in some form of program, because they're quite a common problem to see, especially if you play any like early access games or something. Often you see memory leaks in those. C Sharp and C++ both have extensive libraries that exist already. So what that means is there's lots of code already written with functionality that's already there that you can download. Some of it is provided by default, so you don't need to do everything from scratch with either. A lot of the existing stuff, the most common things you'll want to do, already exists, and you can just take it from online. One difference between them is in C Sharp, you have a single CS file, which is a C Sharp file. And that's where all the code's in. So all the class, all the variables, all the functions, that's all inside a C Sharp file. However, in C++, there is a pair of CPP, which is, as you can guess, C++, and H files, which are header files. So in the CPP file, you'll have the actual functionality of the code, and in the H, the header file, you will have kind of the declarations of the variables and the functions, and kind of initialization in there. One more thing to note is that C Sharp is what is known as a high-level programming language, whereas C++ is a low-level. Now, C Sharp isn't necessarily extremely high level. So what that means, low level means it's closer to the computer. So you have more to do with what's actually happening inside the computer itself. Whereas a high level language means there's a lot of stuff in between you and the computer. So messages pass between software. So yeah, C++ is a very low level programming language, meaning you're closer to the computer. Now, so if you're a beginner, the main thing you want to know is basically what is going to happen when you're learning. So as a beginner with C Sharp, you've got to learn about variable types, functions, the differences between public and private, classes, loops, data structures, and if statements at a minimum. If you want to get started on making actual programs that work, that's kind of the minimum you need to know. However, with C++, you need to learn about all that same stuff, but you also need to learn about the variable sizes, so the size of how much memory each variable type takes up in memory, how much memory it takes up, sorry. You need to learn about memory management, so you need to remember to, whenever you create something new, you need to always destroy it later. You need to learn about header file usage, so you can't just be, well, you can technically keep everything in a CPP file, but it's not very good, basically. You want to have header files, and if you're going to have multiple different classes in a program, you're going to need to know about header files, and you're going to need to use them properly. You're also going to need to learn about pointers, and references, because whereas C# assumes everything's a reference unless it's explicitly stated otherwise, you need to say if it's a pointer, and you need to create pointers, which means you need to manage those pointers along with memory as well as references. And then there's also more things that you need to learn. There's a lot more to learn to get started with C++. And there's just a lot more to learn in general. But as a result of that, as a result of learning all these different things, since you are learning a very low-level language and you're learning stuff that's very close to the computer and how it works, you're getting a more in-depth knowledge of how computers work, and therefore you're just becoming a better programmer in general, because the better you know the computer you're working with, the better at programming you will become. So, as a professional, on the other hand, there's different things you might want to consider. So, if you are making a program and you're trying to make a prototype, it's easier to get from concept to prototype very quickly with C# because of the assumptions it makes. Whereas with C++, you need to have more attention to detail, because if you say, if you have a bit more of a slapdash program that things aren't quite done correctly, you might have memory leaks, you might have crashes, you might have a lot more problems than what you would with C Sharp. With C Sharp, it's a lot harder for things to go wrong. Things can go wrong, definitely. 100% things can go wrong. You can get crashes. But generally, it's a lot harder to make things go wrong with C Sharp than it is C++. Now, C Sharp has not a lot of room for optimization. Now, of course, in terms of the way you do things, you can obviously, there are ways you could do things very unoptimally in C Sharp, just like you could in C++. But in C++, you can do things in a relatively optimal way, but then you can go even further by micromanaging memory and breaking stuff down even more in order to improve the performance in specific areas. Now, you won't do this optimization over the whole program because it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. But there's a lot more opportunity so that in places where you might see a lot of performance hit, where you're performing maybe expensive calculations and stuff like that, you can generally do a lot more optimizations. This will make the program run faster and generally might even decrease the file size as well. Both languages have a wide range of uses in terms of going from general software, so yeah, general applications that you'll see, like GUI-based applications, and they also can be used in games and also advanced AI. Now, one thing I'd say, C Sharp is probably a programming language that is better geared towards things such as networking. You can definitely do networking in C++ as well. However, generally, you don't see that very often. Well, it does exist, but you see it more often in higher level languages, stuff like networking, because there's no need for as much kind of low level detail. Whereas C++, you will see in graphics programming, which I might be incorrect on this, but I don't know of a single graphics library that uses C Sharp, that you can use C Sharp to well, 3D graphics anyway. Definitely you can with 2D graphics, but I might be wrong on this, but I would definitely say C++, because of how intense graphics is in terms of memory, because it takes up a lot of memory to do any kind of graphics programming. C++ is definitely much better geared towards that because you want to do a lot of memory management with that. Because you want to be deleting things as soon as possible. You want to get things out of memory as soon as possible. And you also might want to hold on to some things for a long time because you might need to reuse them later. Now, with C Sharp, the compiler makes a lot of assumptions, which makes work a lot quicker and easier. So like I said before, it's a lot harder to make mistakes, and you can get things done a lot quicker. And as I said, without mistakes, so it's a lot easier. However, in C++, there's few assumptions made by the compiler. So the compiler it makes some assumptions, definitely doesn't make none, but it leaves most of it up to you to explicitly state everything, which means that you are never going to be kind of misunderstood with your code in C++. What you write is exactly what is taken as how it should work, which provides a lot of benefits in terms of, as I said, memory management and optimization. It also means that you can be a bit more specific with how things work than what you can in C Sharp. Now, for most cases, C Sharp is going to be able to do the same things as C++, and it's easier and quicker. So I'm not saying that C++ is necessarily allowing you access to so many more useful things that you just can't do with C Sharp. There are lots of things that you can't do with C Sharp and that you can do with C++, but you can get the general same effect with C Sharp with less work. However, as I said, if you're looking for fine details and you're looking for maximum optimization, you want it to perform as well as possible, whatever you're working on, C++ is definitely the better option for that. So as a conclusion, realistically, as I said there, both languages are very good. So C Sharp is definitely easier to learn for beginners. So if you are coming at this without any programming knowledge. Maybe you have some programming knowledge. No, sorry, slipping over my words there. Maybe you have some programming language knowledge, but not a lot. C Sharp's definitely easier to pick up. And it translates more easily into other programming languages such as Java, I believe. I'm not 100% that. I have not used Java. I used it briefly about 5 years ago, but I don't really know it at all anymore. I can't remember anything about it. But from what I remember, C Sharp seems similar to Java. In-depth knowledge of computers is obtained from learning C++. So you're going to get a lot more kind of, what's the word? Kind of knowledge of the area. So whereas C Sharp, if you learn C Sharp, you're kind of just going to learn C Sharp. Whereas when you learn C++, you're going to learn a lot about how computers work, about a lot of the details and things that happen behind the scenes that you wouldn't otherwise know. Now, both can be used effectively, as I've said, for pretty much any use case. So it's not a case of if you want to do this, then you must use this programming language. It's just some are slightly better geared towards other things. Now, both are in high demand from potential employers. So if you're in the games industry, you will often see people who are looking for C Sharp and C++. Now, this is generally because a lot of them are working in Unity or Unreal, and Unity uses C Sharp and Unreal uses C++. But there's other game engines that also use them. So Godot and CryEngine both use both C Sharp and C++ in some capacity. Now, if you haven't heard of Godot, it's an open source engine. It's completely free to use. It's under the MIT license, I believe. So anything you make is under the MIT license, which I'm not sure the specifics of it. I know you need to. I think you just need to reference that it uses the MIT language, MIT license, and reference the original product. But essentially, you can take it and do whatever, and there's no limits really. But Godot's open source, and you can use a lot of languages with Godot. You can use C Sharp, C++. You can use. They've got their own scripting language called GD Script. They've got GD Native. I think they're trying to implement more. I think that I might be incorrect, but I'm sure I saw that they were trying to put some form of Java functionality in there, but I might be wrong. And CryEngine also you can use both in, which I did not know until I did the research for this. As far as I was aware, CryEngine was C++ exclusive, but I think they've more recently added C Sharp functionality. But yes, so kind of to sum up everything, I'd say you can use either. Sorry, I just hit the mic there. You can use either C Sharp or C++. Now, as a beginner, I'd say it's easier, although it's easier to learn C Sharp, I would say C++ is more rewarding. Now, if you're wanting to quickly get into learning, maybe you're not very confident and you want to kind of get something that makes sense a bit quicker, then C Sharp might be better. Because I know when I first started learning C++, it was extremely hard based on the fact that I had very little programming knowledge to begin with. And it was very hard to have any confidence in it when I just didn't know what was going on. Whereas if I'd started with C Sharp, I might have been a bit more confident and I might have learned other stuff easier. However, as I said, you do get a lot more knowledge from learning C++. If you're wanting to work in the games industry, I would say you're better off learning both. And if you're going to learn both, I would definitely say to start with C++. Because C++ has C Sharp is kind of, I would say, almost like C++ easy mode. So if you learn all the hard stuff and then you move to C Sharp where you don't have to use the hard stuff, it makes C Sharp feel a lot easier, a lot smoother, a lot quicker. Whereas if you start with C Sharp and then you try to learn C++ as well, you might be a little bit less motivated to learn it when you realize that you've got to do all this extra stuff. For outside of games, I would say I see a lot of, in terms of for employers anyway, outside of the games industry, I see a lot of stuff to do with C Sharp and a lot of stuff to do with Java, honestly. Now, I can't comment on Java because I've never used it. But I would say if you're to work in industry, C++ looks very good on a CV. C Sharp is a very widely used skill, but so is C++. Honestly, I'd say the best thing you can do is probably learn both in any case. But if you were to pick just one and you're working kind of outside of the games industry, I would start with C Sharp. If you're just doing this for a hobby, honestly, if you're just doing this as a hobbyist and maybe you just want to mess around with Unity or maybe you want to mess around with something else, I'd say C Sharp is going to be quick and easy for a hobby. And I'd say if you're a hobbyist, definitely C Sharp. But if you're serious and you want to take this as a career path and you really want to learn about computers and how they work and sort of the ins and outs, then C++ is probably the better option. Or, as I said, C++ and then C Sharp. Because realistically, you are much better off knowing both. And once you've learned C++, C Sharp is a cinch to pick up. As I said, it's kind of like C++ easy mode. There's definitely some differences in the way some things are structured. One example would be to do with private and public variables. It's not a big deal, but it's something that I do sometimes forget when I've moved from one to the other. Is in C++, you declare that it's private, and then every variable underneath that is private. And then if you declare it public, then everything underneath that is public. However, if in C Sharp, you have to specifically, each time you make something, it's either public or private. Every single time you have to put that before it. If you don't put anything, it's assumed to be private, which is, yet again, as I said, it's C Sharp making it more convenient and making assumptions for you, but sometimes that's not what you want. But yeah, that's about it really. As I said, if you're doing it as a hobbyist, C Sharp. If you're doing it seriously, I'd say go for C++ and maybe then learn C Sharp after. But that's all for today. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.